In the Hanafi madhhab, there is a khilaf regarding eating prawns. May one legitimately follow the opinion um, of permissibility in the Hanafi madhab or not?
So what what's the ruling of consuming prawn in the Hanafi school, right? Um, the underlying issue is that in the Hanafi school, only fish is allowed from the produce of the sea. What is considered fish is what the Arabs considered fish at the time of revelation. Because revelation came permitting the produce of the sea. And the produce of the sea, the Arabs considered that if it's fish, you can eat it. If it's other stuff, you can't. Right? And then the various schools differed on what are the guidelines governing that. The Hanafis were more, each school has its particular restrictions regarding what was considered fine and what was not considered fine of the produce of the sea. In the Hanafi school, the criterion is fish is permitted, what is not fish is not permitted. There is a difference in judgment. Did Arabs at the time of revelation consider shrimp or prawn, which is to be found in the in the seas around the Arabian Peninsula? Did they consider that to be what they call samak from fish? Some said yes, others said no. So on the basis of that, there is well-established difference of opinion regarding that. Right? So there is leeway in it, right? If someone, and we have a number of answers on Seekers Hub that explain that. So many of the scholars, and a lot of scholars from the Indian subcontinent, have held that yes, it is permitted in the Hanafi school to eat shrimp or prawn, and there's others who didn't. One thing you can't do, you cannot try to be cautious and take things easy. The two things are contradictory. And sometimes people contort themselves. Like, sort of they go into pretzel, they try to become human pretzels. That, okay, I want to be cautious, but I want to eat whatever I can. Now, how are you going to pull that one off? Because if you want to be cautious, then you need to apply the principles of caution related to your conduct. And if you don't, then you should know clearly what the limits are and don't go past those limits. Right? Caution is religiously praiseworthy. Right? But the way you practice caution, if someone wants to be cautious, caution is not simply to make things difficult for oneself. Right? One of the great Hanafi scholars came up with a beautiful principle, right? That the basis of caution is not strictness. The basis of Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam, that the basis of caution is to be careful to do that which is more likely to be more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now what is the scale by which we know what is more likely to be pleasing to Allah? That scale and standard is knowledge. It's not simply that, okay, I don't know if it is halal, so I'm not going to do it. No, if you want to be cautious, or something is halal. So let's say bread, the basis of bread is its permissibility. So I don't know if this bread is halal, so I'm going to just avoid bread. There's people who said, I've seen places where they have certified halal water. I kid you not. I'm not going to mention the country. And it would take a lot to have something that's considered water and it not to be halal. Right? It's almost inconceivable. So, and Sidi Amjad has been to that country where we have certified halal water. We traveled there together. Right? So if one wants to be cautious, the key is learn. Right? Learn. Like what are the principles of caution related to this particular endeavor? So in the Hanafi school, if someone wishes to take that opinion, it's a sound, well-established opinion in the madhhab, in the Hanafi school, one can eat prawn. Wants to be cautious and wants to avoid it, that is their prerogative. Right? That if someone wishes to be cautious in it. But the ruling of caution, that where caution is called for, it is recommended. It is not incumbent. There's also a broader reality. So if someone is taking that opinion, you cannot think ill of anybody who is doing anything that is permissible within the Sharia, on any sound opinion within mainstream Islam. You may not do it, but the act of thinking ill of another who is doing something in itself permissible within the Sharia is that it's sinful. Right? And sometimes that's one of the areas that religious people commit sin. That they're trying to be cautious, so they look down on someone who isn't. But it's not obligatory to be cautious. And there is an opinion permitting it. As in Sham, in the Syrian scholars, they say, "Mish ala kifik." It's not the way you want it to be. Right? So that's something to be aware of in these matters. It is also true that while it is praiseworthy for someone to strive to adhere to one school of Islamic law, right, and the scholars encourage that because it gives a standard of taqwa in one's practice, in itself, the majoritarian opinion within Islamic scholarship is that you are religiously bound to follow a sound religious opinion on every single action that you do. Right? You don't have to follow the same school's opinion on everything that you do. So if someone, quote unquote, is Hanafi, but they're eating oyster, for example, or they're eating squid or some other seafood, you cannot think ill of them. Why? Because those seafoods, there are schools within Islamic scholarship that permit it, and maybe they're taking a dispensation, and thinking ill of them would be impermissible there. It's in itself superior to stick to your own school, but someone may be doing it for a reason. Okay? So once, I generally, I don't eat these kinds of things, but once someone had invited me out, and I was in conversation, and they were going, there's this amazing ingredient, there's this amazing dish they have here, etc. I'm going to order it to you. They're so excited, and it was this calamari dish, and they're really excited, and they're like, "Shaykh Faraz, try some." Now, normally, as a Hanafi, I wouldn't eat calamari. But now, in front of everybody, I'm not going to tell them, "Oh, I don't eat that," because it'll embarrass them. Right? So one of the situations where the ulama state that one can take a sound dispensation is for the sake of another. So you grew up, let's say, in New England, and there, let's say, you have an aunt there, and she made you some lobster dish. So you're visiting, she spent all day making this fancy lobster dish, and you say, "Oh, I don't eat lobster anymore." Right? It's within your right to do that, but that may be a situation where you may take a dispensation for the sake of another. Right? And what considerations are governing someone's choices, that's not up to you. So that's something just to keep in mind as well with respect to the actions of those around us. The final thing when it comes to caution with respect to food that requires is that if someone wants to be cautious regarding food, there's three basic things just to keep in mind. One is that be careful regarding restaurants. Right? Be careful regarding restaurants, particularly restaurants where there isn't a standard of caution with respect to what they are offering you. Because sometimes our attitude with respect to the halal restaurant industry defies common sense. Right? So if there's some restaurant that says we're halal, but they've got posters of film stars, and they're blasting haram music, and they're selling haram DVDs, and they're doing all these haram things. Oh, but the meat is halal. And that's a point of obvious caution, right? That be sensibly careful with respect to where you get your food from. Right? There's a basic common sense caution, and particularly when it comes to meat. And that's why, as a community, it's a good practice that we have halal certification agencies that look at so that there's a verifiable standard for this, because the opportunity for abuse is clear. So be careful about halal restaurants. And not to doubt them. We don't have to judge, is it allowed or not, but to be careful, right? And it's from basic caution to only, if you're going to go eat at an establishment, to choose establishments where there's there's some good reason to believe that they are being careful, right? And to be discerning, particularly if you go somewhere often. You do go, let's say your family, have a large family here in Toronto now, many families, they'll, when they have family gathering, they'll order food from a particular restaurant. The places that you do go to, you go to a burger place every once in a while, whatever, make at least those kinds of places, verify that it's somewhere that is, you have good reason to believe it's halal, without making judgment that other places are haram or whatever. That's number one, with respect to so there's baseline caution about, be careful about where you eat from. The second thing to be careful about, with respect to food ingredients, is that something that has 4 ingredients is much easier to verify than something that has 44 ingredients. Okay? And both in terms of religious permissibility, but also health-wise. Beware of processed foods. Okay? Health-wise, they're probably not good for you, but religiously, something that has 44 ingredients, right? You're making life complicated for yourself. When we're in Damascus, and this is really a scholar speaking from his fitrah. Someone asked Sheikh Muhammad Jum'ah, a respected Hanafi scholar, that these imported French cheeses, what's the ruling of them? And he looked incredulous. He said, "Ish biddak fiha?" He said, what do you want with those cheeses? He says, "Khud lak qa'ida." He said, take a principle. كل طعام مسته المصانع فهو مشبوه. And that's an amazing principle. Any food that has been touched by a factory should be considered dubious. Because food does not need to go through a factory to be consumed. He said, if you want cheese, go to the local milk store. Right? They have these places, the Mahal Alban, right? Where the milk is locally sourced. You know the milk shop owner, etc. You know the milk's from a wholesome place. The guy is from your neighborhood. He prepares the cheese, right? So, so be wary of that, right? Because not just in terms dubiousness, but also, health-wise. The other aspect with respect to food, especially the things that one consumes regularly, and this applies to other areas of one's consumption, is that part of something being tayyib is where you get it from should be tayyib. And we're negligent regarding this. And it's very clear in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that the hands of people and the motives of people affect the spiritual wholesomeness of what they produce. And that injustice and ill motive in the preparation or production of goods and services affects them. We know this from clothing. The Prophet ﷺ, when he would wear a new garment, he would make dua. Right? That, oh Allah, this is a thobe. And he'd name the particular item. Allahumma yasaluka khayrahu wa khayra ahlihi wa khayra ma suni'a min ajlihi. That, oh Allah, ask you for the good of this, and the good of those who made it, and the good of what it was made for. And, oh Allah, I seek refuge from the harm of it, meaning actual or potential, and the harm of its people, and the harm of what they made it for. Right? And the ulama have explained this in detail, but when it comes to your clothing, your food, etc., part of religious caution is to be aware of where is this sourced from. Is there injustice and oppression, harm associated with it? And the believer neither harms nor accepts harm. That's one of the foundational principles of our religion. We neither harm nor accept harm. So that is at a collective level, it's obligatory to ward off indirect harm. At a personal level, it's recommended. So be careful regarding that. So where you get your food from, etc., and one should be a discerning customer when it comes to these things, right? And there's no less harm, and especially a lot of these multinationals, etc., the harm they do. We can talk about terrorism, and I could make this. Coca-Cola kills many more people than terrorism does. Right? And one just needs to be aware of that reality, that we have to be aware of the harmful effect of these corporations. Nestle has destroyed entire economies successfully. Right? So one has to be careful, or just to not, picking on two of many criminal organizations. So one needs to be careful about that as well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who are discerning with respect to the choices we make. And just as food, it's very clear in the sunnah that being careful of what you wear is critical. Right? That's why the Prophet ﷺ made so many du'as for it. And to be honest, when in an hour's time this place is more full, if everyone took off every item of clothing that is not sourced ethically, most people here will be naked. Most of what you're wearing, unless you have made deliberate, conscious choices to dress ethically, most of it is sourced through ways that there's oppression. That ridiculously cheap undergarments were made because people are being crushed for your socks, your undergarments, your shirt, your trousers, for most of it. So be discerning regarding that. Be aware, particularly things that you get regularly. Choose wholesome food. Choose wholesome clothing, right? And if you do, you'll find divine assistance and facilitation, because good is not sought through harm.